Hello, thank you so much for joining us this morning for our summit.
Thank you so much for having me.
We had some technical difficulties, but we overcame them and now we're here and ready to get started. So excited to have you. I know when I was reviewing the questions that you submitted and about your background, I think that what you have to talk about is going to be so interesting for our audience. So just to get started, can you tell everyone a little bit about you, what you do and your background?
Sure. So I'm a nutritional therapist that specializes in weight loss for women in their mid stage of life around perimenopause and menopause. I'm based in the UK, and my kind of whole philosophy is about getting to the root cause of problems, rather than just getting people to eat less or burn more calories, which has very limited benefits in the long term. Instead, prefer to dig into why they're struggling with the menopausal symptoms, the stubborn weight that often comes with it. And once you address those underlying issues, weight loss and achieving optimal health becomes much, much easier without having to diet.
I love that. And this has come up in a few different speakers of like, instead of fighting the symptoms, let's figure out what the issue is. And once you solve that, it shouldn't feel like a struggle, right? It should feel very natural and easy.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. So just to get us started, why do so many women over 40 struggle with weight loss? Why is this such an issue, even when they're eating less, exercising more, doing all the right things?
There's lots of changes that happen to your body around the time of perimenopause. One of the biggest shifts that happens is your sex hormones gradually start to decline as your ovaries start to wind down on the approach to full-on menopause. And that has a big impact on your body in several ways. So the decline in estrogen, a lot of people might know about the impact that has on like skin and aging skin and bone health and that sort of thing. But it also has a massive impact on your metabolism, because the decline in estrogen tends to correlate with a loss of muscle mass if you're not taking steps to preserve or build your muscle. And your muscle is metabolically active. It burns calories even when we're not using our muscles. So the less we have, the lower our metabolic rate is, or the slower our metabolism is, and the harder it is to maintain a healthy weight. You're going to become more prone to putting on weight as your muscle mass declines. So that's a really big factor. And what makes that even more challenging is that the way that we've been taught to manage our weight, which is eat less, exercise more, actually makes that muscle loss worse. Because if we want to be maintaining and building muscle, we've got to be fueling our bodies and eating enough rather than depriving our bodies of fuel. So that's part of the reason why the diets that many women found used to work when they're in their 20s and 30s, that's why they don't tend to work in the same way as we get into our late 30s, 40s and beyond. Many women find that they might work initially, but they very quickly stop working, or they might even cause weight gain, which just, doesn't make sense with what we've been taught about how our bodies apparently manage weight. If we're just subscribing to that calorie balance model, it just doesn't add up. So that's a big factor, the muscle mass side of things. And also, when our body goes through this transition where our sex hormones are declining, one of the things that our body does to try and compensate is our adrenal glands, which are our stress glands. They take over some of the production of our sex hormones. And so your adrenals essentially go from having to do the job of just producing your stress hormones to having to also produce some of your sex hormones. And the impact that has is it essentially makes us far less resilient to the impact of stress. And any stress is something that will further speed up the decline of estrogen, speed up the muscle loss, and also just ramp up the symptoms that come with perimenopause. And stress obviously comes in many forms. Not only is it your typical financial pressures and that sort of thing, but it's also things like lack of sleep and under eating, over exercising, which are very common things that I see in women who are, really desperately trying to lose weight. So it's a little bit of a recipe for disaster in terms of the way that our body changes and the way that we typically try and approach that. So it's all about flipping that on its head and taking a different approach.
I love that. So let's talk about the mistakes and like what people are doing that makes it difficult or challenges them. What are some mistakes that women are making so all of our listeners can avoid them?
Yeah. So the first one is what I've already said in terms of just cutting back the amount of food they're eating or amping up their exercise. What I prefer to do with my clients is focus on what your body needs rather than just trying to cut stuff out and deprive your body. Instead, think about, what am I lacking? What do I need more of? Is it more protein? Is it more sleep? Is it more downtime or me time? Because, going back to what I said before, the lack of nutrients, the high stress levels, the lack of sleep, these are things that have a massive impact on your metabolism and hormones. And you're going to get much better results nourishing your body than you are punishing it. So I'd say that's the biggest mistake, just kind of going a bit too aggressive with cutting things out. So flipping that approach and taking a much more nurturing, nourishing approach, like you would with a child, treat yourself with the care and love that you would a child, and that would give you better results. So that's the first one. The second mistake, I think, is ignoring the signs that your body is giving you. All these symptoms that come up around the time of perimenopause and menopause, they're signs from your body. And if we can listen to them and tune into them rather than just suppress them, then we can learn a lot about what our body needs. Cravings, for example, are often a sign of a lack of something. It could be a lack of magnesium or even salt or protein. So tuning into what the symptoms are telling you and when they're happening can give us an awful lot of information.
I love that. It's like, instead of trying to make the symptoms go away, what is it trying to tell us? It's so important. Our bodies are trying to give us messages and tell us what they need. And it's funny you mentioned magnesium. That one comes up a lot. And our immune support shot has as much magnesium as 5 cups of spinach in it. And one of the reasons I put magnesium in that shot is it's hard to get in your diet because you have to have leafy greens and things that are hard to maybe incorporate on a regular basis. But that's just one example, right? There could be any number of things that your body needs. It's trying to tell you. So it's like decoding the messages.
Yeah. And I talk about magnesium all the time because it's such a common deficiency. Like you said, you have to eat an awful lot of leafy greens and, all sorts of different things to get enough magnesium in. And the thing is, magnesium is in a lot of food, but just in very low levels. And it's very depleted from the soil and therefore the food that we eat. So even someone with a really good diet can struggle to get enough magnesium, partly because of that, but also because just modern life is one that really means that our body has a high demand for magnesium. High stress levels, things like caffeine and alcohol make us kind of flush out magnesium quicker or burn through it quicker. And, if you're exercising a lot, then you're going to have a slightly higher demand for magnesium too. So, most of us have a much higher demand than kind of the recommended daily intake says we need. And it's very difficult to get enough of it just through eating food alone.
Yes, completely agree. And the soil thing, I didn't really realize that, but I've since learned that just industrialized farming has reduced nutrients in the soil. So a cup of spinach today doesn't even contain as much magnesium as a cup of spinach 30 years ago. So even if you are getting all of those fruits and vegetables, you still might have some deficiencies.
Yeah, and that kind of really brings us nicely to another mistake that people make, which is often we focus on going for the lowest fat foods or the lowest calorie foods, and unfortunately they tend to be the most nutrient poor foods. And that can make it really difficult to ever feel satisfied and to manage cravings and hunger, because our bodies are really good at telling us when we need more of something. If you're not getting enough protein particularly, but also if there's certain nutrients lacking, your body isn't going to be satisfied even with a big meal. It's going to tell you to keep eating because it wants to get those nutrients in one way or another. So instead of looking at labels and looking at, okay, how many calories does this have, or is this low in fat, is this labeled as diet, really want to steer clear of anything that's labeled up as diet or low fat or light or anything like that, and go for the whole food version. It will be higher in calories, but that means that you're going to be fuller, you're going to be more satisfied, you're not going to have crashes and energy slumps later on where you're going to be more prone to binging on carbs and sugars, and you're going to be getting far more nutrients in as well. And we need fat. Fat is really great for our hormones. So that is one of the top things that I would suggest doing, is pivot away from those diet foods and eat the whole foods.
I totally agree. And it's funny because if you really look at the labels of a lot of low fat foods, they're putting in a lot of sugar to make it taste good without the fat. And that's not good, right? So I think it's funny, there was that whole fad where like fat was the enemy and everything had to be fat free, but that's not really helpful. And so I think people are becoming more educated about looking for sugar, because sugar can show up in so many different ways on a label. Corn syrup, like even agave, honey, even some of these things that sound healthy are really just sugar. And that's why, like in our vitamin E shots, we do not add any sugar. It's just any sugars that are in there are from the fruits, and then we add in the vitamins. I'm a huge believer in what you're saying. So you mentioned fat being important for hormones. So let's talk a little bit about hormones. I think especially for those in our audience who are in their late 30s, 40s, early 50s, that's a hot topic. So what role do hormones play in all of this, and how can women work with that process?
Hormones play a massive role. They really control pretty much everything to do with how our body burns fat and stores fat and where we store it. And when we say the word hormones, most people think instantly of estrogen and progesterone, but there's lots of different types of hormones that I'm referring to when I say hormones. So you've got like the blood sugar hormones, which are things like insulin and glucagon, which manage your blood sugars, and they essentially determine whether you're in fat burning or fat storage mode. So keeping your blood sugars balanced and trying to avoid sugar highs that happen frequently or happen for a long time will help you to get into fat burning mode more often. And what's interesting is that a lot of the typical diets out there that are more low fat, low calorie, they tend to spike your blood sugars a lot because they tend to be very carbohydrate heavy, because carbs are lower in calories than fats. So the problem with that is, when you're younger, your body's really good at managing blood sugars. And so it doesn't really have such a big impact on you. And you do lose weight more easily on a lower carb diet, on a higher carb diet. But when you get into this mid stage of life, your body is more prone to insulin resistance. You're not so good at managing insulin and blood sugars. So you can't get away with eating like that because your blood sugars just stay elevated constantly. And so that's another reason why we don't see such good results with those traditional diets, and we have to flip the approach. So that's one set of hormones. And then we also want to think about the thyroid. That is a really important factor. It's really the master of your metabolism, and it controls how fast everything works, how fast fat burning works, So again, you could be in a calorie deficit, you could have your blood sugars balanced, but if your thyroid isn't working properly, then that's going to really slow everything down and make the weight much more resistant to coming off. And then the sex hormones are a big group in and of themselves, and they can be imbalanced in many different ways, whether you've got high estrogen or low progesterone, or those two are out of balance with each other, or maybe testosterone's off. Whatever way it is, that can cause resistance to fat loss, because they can drive inflammation, they can drive insulin resistance, they interact with your thyroid. So the sex hormones are important as well, but they also tend to be more impacted by the other things going on in the body, like your gut health and liver function and nutrient status. So what I always like to preface all this with is, yes, hormones are really important for your weight management, but they are really a symptom of other issues. We can't blame hormones for everything. We need to actually go another level deeper and think, what's actually impacting the hormones? Is it imbalances in the gut? Is it inflammation or other issues?
That's so interesting that you bring up the thyroid. Correct me if I'm wrong, but are people like just starting to learn about the thyroid? The thyroid seems very trendy, and I don't think I've ever heard so much about it as I have lately.
I don't know. I think I'm in a world where it's talked about constantly. So I'm not really sure whether it's a trendy topic at the moment, but it's something that, there's a lot of talk about thyroid, and there has been for a while, because there's a lot of issues with the way that thyroid's tested. The typical tests are very basic, and they tend to miss a lot of imbalances. And also what the kind of doctors or conventional medicine consider to be normal function is very debatable. And, kind of what the research shows is that actually optimal thyroid function is quite different to what we're told is normal. So, many women have the thyroid checked. They're told that it's all fine. Don't worry. Just try a bit harder and the weight will come off. But actually, sometimes it's that they're not optimal. Okay, they might be in that normal range, but it's not optimal. Or it might be that the test hasn't dug deep enough. We haven't looked at all the thyroid hormones and the surrounding factors to really pick up an imbalance that could be driving difficulty with fat loss or other symptoms.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, maybe it's just starting to trickle down to me. But so what are some quick and easy ways that women can really jumpstart their weight management if they're interested in making some changes?
I think one of the first things to do is go back to what I was saying about eating enough. Make sure that you're fueling your body properly. And the best place to start with that is protein. And this is something that is obviously, kind of trendy and everyone's talking about it, but it's for very, very good reason. There's so many reasons why protein is important. Not only is it kind of the building blocks of hormones and so many things in the body, and we need plenty of it to be able to repair our muscles and make our hormones, but also protein is very satiating. It keeps us fuller for longer. It helps to balance out our blood sugars. And also it requires more calories to digest protein than it does to digest carbs or fats. So, you get a lot of bang for your buck when you eat protein. So loads of reasons why protein is really important, and getting that into every meal as well. That is always a really good place to start. And then alongside that, or once you've kind of mastered that one, start thinking about fiber. I think fiber is something that isn't talked about enough. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was kind of the next thing that becomes really trendy. Fiber and getting a vast kind of diversity of different types of fibers in the diet, which essentially means eating as many different types of plants as you can. That doesn't mean, that you can't eat meat or anything like that, but we want to make sure that we've got a good diversity of different plant-based foods in the diet, from, of course, fruits and vegetables, but also herbs and spices and nuts and seeds and, everything that is a plant, basically. Getting that variety in really helps to nurture the gut, and the gut is just absolutely core to all health and well-being, whether it's physical health or mental health. So nurturing the gut is really key. And for so many of my clients that I work with, there are gut issues that they never even realized that they had. They're not always super obvious, but they can have a big knock-on effect on your hormone balance and inflammation and all sorts of things. So protein and fiber, really good place to start. And then I would, alongside that, also say, don't ignore the non-food and exercise factors. Think about your sleep and stress and do what you can to improve those, because it is, they're both factors that, even if you had the perfect diet and you're doing the best exercise for you, if you're not sleeping properly and if you're really highly stressed and not taking steps to manage that and support your body through it, you're going to have limited benefits from the efforts that you're making with your food and exercise.
Yes. It's fun. You said that the gut health is core to your health. I'm like, no pun intended. But yeah, I couldn't agree more on fiber. And our gut health shot, that was one of the reasons we put the 5 grams of fiber in there. So our 2.5 ounce shot has 5 grams of soluble fiber, which is as much as a cup of broccoli. But it's funny because the original inspiration for it was gut health, feeding your gut microbiome and gut bacteria, but there are so many other benefits. And I love that you said fiber might be the next wave of what everyone's talking about, because I do think the more I learn about fiber and the importance with regulating your blood sugar, managing cravings, it is such an easy thing to incorporate into your diet to just help with all of that. And we're actually producing a fiber guide of just what is fiber, like what are the different kinds, what's the benefit of it, and including a bunch of different smoothie recipes where people can get 10, 20 grams of fiber in a smoothie by adding beans, a vitamin E's gut health, flax seeds. So I love that you brought that out. I'm passionate about fiber.
Yeah. I think at the moment, there's such a huge amount of ultra processed food out there, and that is devoid of fiber in most cases. And there's a lot of products out there that are, they brand themselves up as being healthy and really good for you. And maybe it's because they're vegan or because they're gluten-free or some other kind of buzzword. But often, unfortunately, those words can be synonymous with ultra processed, because they are creating almost like a man-made product rather than a very natural product with few wholesome ingredients. And so, when we're eating a lot of those ultra processed foods, the fiber content of our diet is often just on the floor. So just trying to switch out some of those more processed foods for more wholesome foods can boost your fiber intake as well.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a rich conversation, so many good takeaways. If people are interested in learning more about what you do or finding you, where can they find you?
So my website is louisedigbynutrition.com, and I'm also quite active on Instagram, so you can find me at Louise Digby Nutrition, and also the same handle on YouTube and Facebook.
Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.